Good afternoon, and welcome to High Noon with Holmes, where you can get some inspiration, some motivation, and some instruction on a Tuesday to help you along with the rest of your week. If we were to hear the term self love, you may get a negative connotation from that word, considering the way that the world may use it. Often, when the world or when secular people use the term self love, they actually mean something more along the lines of selfishness. But of course, if I were to use the term self hate, we could all agree that that is something that God doesn't want for us and something that's even unspiritual. So, when using the term self love today, what I mean is loving ourselves the same way that God loves us, seeing ourselves the same way that God sees us. When we look at the book of Leviticus, chapter 19 and verse 18b, you hear this very popular verse: You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Interestingly, God normally uses he himself as a rubric, but in this specific verse, he actually uses we ourselves as rubrics to love other people. That if we cannot love ourselves, how can we actually love others? And ultimately, because we did not love ourselves the way that we should have as God's people, he later would send Jesus. And Jesus would say, I want you to love each other, your neighbor, not just as you love yourselves, but ultimately as I have loved you. Here in the book of Leviticus, chapter 19, you see some explicit things on the surface about what it means to love our neighbors, to love those around us. But there's also another string of evidence underneath the surface, and this is how we should love ourselves. That if we love others, it will ultimately be because we can love ourselves. To the extent we love ourselves is the extent we love others. If we love ourselves at a 2, then that's the capacity we can love someone else. And if we love ourselves at a 2, that is also the capacity that we can receive love from others. Interestingly, we can see the dynamic of loving others and loving self all right here in Leviticus 19. Verse 9, for instance, it reads, You shall not reap your field right up to its edge, neither shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. He says, you should leave some for others. But if you flip it, it also means you should leave some for yourself. He goes on in the next verse, You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. Verse 13, it reads, You shall not oppress your neighbor. But if you should not oppress your neighbor, that also means you should not oppress yourself. You can pick up in verse 16. It says, You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people. It means you should not go around talking ill about others, nor should you go about speaking ill of yourself. 17 is interesting in that it actually uses the word, You shall not hate your brother in your heart. And if you should not hate your brother, that also means you shouldn't hate yourself. Self-hate is a real thing. We cover it up with education. We cover it up with fine clothes. We cover it up with a pseudo humility or a pseudo confidence. But because of things that happened when we were children, that happened in our marriage, that happened in our experiences with other people, sometimes we hate the way we look. And we tell ourselves that all the time. We hate that we're not further along in our career. And we make jokes demeaning ourselves all the time. Other times we feel that we are not worthy of love from God or love from others. And so then we spend time oppressing ourselves. We give and give and give because we think that if I give, maybe other people will love me back. And so in giving so much, there is none left for ourselves. I think that that is not humility. I think that that's not loving God. I think instead that's self-hate. And self-hate is the very thing that puts us at odds with God, because God made us beautifully and wonderfully and fearfully. And so for us to hate ourselves, to look in the mirror and hate our body, to hate our personality, to hate the lot that we have, to compare ourselves to others, is to actually disagree with God. I believe that as Christians, that as people who have been delivered from the stain of sin, the oppression of the world around us, that we can actually look at ourselves and love what we see. Look at ourselves, and even with our imperfections, see we ourselves as God sees us. And if we can love ourselves, only then can we love others and truly receive love from others.